If you have a true scary story you'd like to see featured on the channel, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to send it my way. And thank you. Oh, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Hey Raven, this may be a little different than what you normally do, but I still thought you would appreciate it. This happened Christmas Eve in 2018. I was living in Colorado at the time, in a small 2-bedroom house by myself. It was my first owned place, and I was enjoying my new home in a quieter neighborhood, outside of the bigger city life that I had left behind. My grandparents had their own piece of land, and I loved seeing them out there in the quiet, peaceful nights. It's actually what convinced me to move to the home that I have now. That night was going just as planned. I had the day off, as well as Christmas Day and the day after. My mom was to pick up my grandma from her home Christmas morning, and I was going to meet them back at my parents' place with my other siblings. And to make it even better, it had started snowing. It was going to turn out to be a perfect Christmas with everyone together and a beautiful blanket of snow on the ground. After watching TV and drinking one of my favorite hot chocolate bombs, I decided to call it a night, knowing that I was going to need to be up early to get my car cleaned off. I remember the details from here perfectly. I can't forget it. I went to bed around 10 p.m. and was abruptly woken to a phone call at 2:24 a.m. The number shown was listed as unknown, but knowing the time, I answered it to make sure it wasn't an emergency. But all I heard was a faint and almost inaudible whisper. I couldn't make out any of the words. I said hello a few more times, but the whispering continued until the line just went dead. I was confused, if not a little annoyed. Who would prank call someone on Christmas Eve, right? I just laid back down and tried to go back to sleep, but my phone started going off again, from another unknown number. I answered the same way, and just like the last time, all that was there was the whispering. The annoyance was now overtaking the confusion that they were still calling me. I asked, "Who is this?" But the whispering only continued, and I was nowhere closer to being able to make out what was being said. And then once again, the call just ended. And this time I tried to see if I could call the number back, but it wouldn't. It was like a blocked number, so there was no way to call it or even block it. I was pretty awake at this point, but still tried to sleep, knowing that if I didn't, it was going to be a very long day. However, I once again received a call, and this time I answered with a bit more annoyance in my voice. "What do you want?" I said aggressively into the phone. Again, the whispering continued until I could make out one word: Marcus. It was my name. Because I could make that out, I tried to listen closer to the whispering to see if I could hear something else. Was someone in trouble? Were they calling me for help, but all they could do was whisper? I pushed the phone harder to my ear, plugging the other one with my finger, when out of nowhere the whispering was interrupted by a very loud train whistle. It had actually made me jump. Pulling the phone away from my face, I continued to hear the train whistle for several more seconds, before it eventually faded, and the call ended again. Now, I was for sure awake, and I wasn't going to be able to fall back asleep. The train whistle was obviously unexpected. I didn't live near any train tracks, so I knew at least that the call wasn't coming from around my area, but then where? And again, who was it that was calling me? Like I said, it was 2-something in the morning. I was groggy, confused, and now startled. So I wasn't thinking straight and definitely was not going back to sleep. I went back to the living room thinking maybe I could watch some TV and doze off in there. But every little sound was making me jump. The creaks in the floor, the ice maker clicking on, and even the tapping on the window from my sun catcher outside. Thankfully, my phone didn't ring again, but damage was already done. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep in the living room at some point, because I woke up to the alarm on my phone at 6 a.m. I tried to snooze it some, but eventually I just got up. I was still feeling pretty tired and now had a little bit of a stiff neck, but I knew that I needed to get moving. I had taken a shower and then went out to start cleaning off my car. It was probably around 8 at this point when I got a call from my mother. Her voice was shaky, and she asked me where I was and what I was doing. I told her that I was about to head over to her place, but asked her what was wrong. I knew my mom, and I could tell that something was wrong. And her explanation forever changed our Christmas. She told me that she had gone to pick up my grandma, but she didn't answer the door, so she had to let herself in. Not really unusual, especially if my grandma didn't hear the door or was in the bathroom or something. We even installed a Ring doorbell so that she could be notified on her phone, but she also liked to sit her phone down somewhere and then forget about it. She was definitely not attached to her phone like us kids, as she would always tell us jokingly. But when my mom entered, she knew that something was wrong when the TV wasn't on and the coffee maker was empty. She called out to her and got no response, so she went to her room. My mom found my grandmother unresponsive, and after help arrived, they pronounced her. My mom already knew that she was gone. She didn't suffer and she wasn't hurt. She passed quietly and peacefully in her sleep that night. That's when I think I pieced things together. When we got her death certificate, I saw that the approximate time of death was around 2:30 a.m. Then I started thinking back to those calls that I got. Was that my grandma? She had a cell phone and I had her number saved, sure, so it should have showed up if she did call me physically. But maybe it wasn't that kind of call. I even proved that when we had her phone and I checked the records. There were no calls to me. I didn't really want to say it to anyone, but I did ask if my parents or siblings got any weird or prank calls that night. They all said no. So I got these strange calls of whispering, and my name being whispered at the same time of her death. Oh, and to add to it, she actually lived fairly close to a train yard. Train whistles were very common around her place, so I really felt like this was possible. Was she calling to let me know? Was that her last attempt to reach me and say goodbye? I still think about that night on a regular basis, especially around this time of year, and I hold on to it as a last connection that I had with my grandmother. She was always the type to play little pranks on us grandkids, even as we became adults, and I now recognize this as her way of one last hurrah before she left this place, and I smile when I think about it. I was definitely confused, and yeah, kind of annoyed at first, but now, I feel lucky that I got the call. We make sure to keep up our normal Christmas traditions, as we know that's what she would have wanted, not for us to be sad or mournful. And I always smile when I hear a train whistle, too. Christmas has always been a very heartfelt and magical time for our family. Most of the family has dispersed throughout the Midwest, some on the West Coast, and we don't get to see each other very often. I still live in my hometown, so I get to see my grandma and parents on the regular. But there are those of us that only come together during this specific time of year. Like a lot of people, my grandmother and grandfather basically run the holidays. Everyone shows up at their house because it's big enough for everyone, and they love hosting. They've hosted as far back as I can remember. And on Christmas, it is everyone there for the celebrations. And that scene being painted for you, I have a story about a very specific Christmas that happened a long time ago. One that, well, let's just say that it stuck with everyone. I was around 6 years old at that time, in that age where Christmas is still this amazing and magical time of the year, and where the mention of Santa Claus would get me all giddy and excited. The room was full of relatives, people talking to each other, enjoying the company. My cousins and I were all gathered around the Christmas tree and trying to guess which gifts were ours. My grandma was in the kitchen with my mom, and really it was just a great afternoon. Then, suddenly, the festive atmosphere was shattered by a loud bang on the front door, which caught everyone's attention. Before anyone could react and go to the door to see who it was, the door literally burst open, and in walked a man dressed like Santa Claus. He wasn't a jolly and rosy-cheeked Santa that I was used to. I remember thinking that he looked sad, and like he needed to wash his hair. But in my eyes, he was Santa, and I was excited. He bellowed out a classic, "Ho, ho, ho!" as he staggered into the room. I remember shouting, "Guys, it's Santa!" And when I looked around, I remember seeing the adults all just standing there and staring at this man that was trudging into the house. To me, it was just Santa making this really cool, dramatic entrance. And I was sitting there clapping in delight, completely unaware of what exactly was going on and why everyone else looked like they were upset or confused. My dad stepped into the room and angrily asked who the hell this man was. I remember I was angry with him for being so rude to Santa. Santa let out a harsh laugh and said, "I'm Santa. I'm just here to spread some holiday love and cheer." It was then that my aunt paled and said, "Rick?" I asked who Rick was, of course, and I didn't get an answer. Then Santa laughed and said, "Oh, there's my dear ex-wife, looking jolly as always." I was super excited at this point, because again, in my head, my aunt was once married to Santa Claus. I was confused as to why she was calling him Rick, though. I didn't know his name was Rick. It was about this point that my dad stepped up again and told this man that he needed to leave, saying that he had 10 seconds to get out before he called the cops. It was about this point where the situation shifted in my mind. Clearly this wasn't okay. This Santa apparently wasn't supposed to be there and had definitely done something wrong. This was proven to me when the man said, "Now, let's not ruin Christmas for everyone. We don't want things to get ugly. I mean, I might have a gun in here." It was about this point that my mom grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the scene. The whole time I'm asking about why Santa would have a gun in his sack, and said, "Who asked for a gun for Christmas?" It was such an awkward situation for me, and I'm sure my cousins as well, but I was just so confused as to what was going on. I remember that while my mom was talking to me in the kitchen, about nothing in particular, I could hear people shouting in the living room, including Santa, and people just telling him to get out of the house. At some point, he must have realized that he was outnumbered, because he did leave. I recall the rest of that night being very, very saddened. The entire festivity had been ruined for me. My dad had called the cops to report what had happened because the guy had threatened us, but also because he was clearly drunk and was driving away. I remember my dad talking to the cops and me trying to tell them not to arrest Santa, and said that he just needed a hug because he was sad. Well, I found out much later that Rick was, apparently, my aunt's ex-husband, as he'd mentioned. They had been divorced for over 3 years due to his abusive behavior and his alcoholism. He had no other connections to our family, and his unexpected, terrifying intrusion on our Christmas gathering was a pretty horrible reminder of my aunt's past. My mom actually told me about all of this quite a few years later, when I absentmindedly asked her about the random guy who showed up to Christmas dressed as Santa that one year. It was a scary story to be told, especially how excited I was to see this man that I thought was a symbol for joy, when, in reality, he was an abusive drunk that was there to just cause terror in my aunt's life. Thankfully, nothing more happened, and he did just leave without doing anything else. But it still altered how I, and a lot of our family, looked at Christmas. Hello. I'm new to your channel, and I love the idea of being able to share our stories with you. I feel like it allows more of a connection with your listeners, and you make it incredibly easy to do so thank you for that. I have one that I often share with my friends, so I thought I would share it with you, too. This happened to me back in 2014. I didn't have the best relationship with my family. Both of my parents were abusive in their own ways to me and my 2 other siblings, but our paternal grandparents were our safe haven. We liked to go over there as much as possible to have a safe place to sleep and to eat. And I think that they knew too, but didn't know how to handle it. Being an adult now, I think they had a hard time knowing how horrible of a person their son was, and they didn't want to call the cops, or even CPS on him, and so they tried to make it up by taking care of us. I never was really close to my maternal grandparents, so they were really all that we had. My older brother ended up moving in with his dad, as he did have a different father, while me and my little brother had to endure it until we were old enough to leave. I moved out when I turned 18, and into a place with my friend until I could get my own place. But I felt guilty leaving my brother there. I felt like I was abandoning him, so once I had my own place, I tried to have him over as much as possible. When he turned 16, our parents more or less kicked him out, because they wanted to use our room, even though I was a girl and we shared a room, as a rented room for their friend. My older brother's room was already turned into an office or game room that none of us were allowed to go in. Because I wasn't willing to give them money for my brother, like I was paying child support for some weird reason, and they couldn't charge him for rent, they told him to leave. I had my own place at this point, so I happily took him in until he moved out at 19. I told him that he could stay as long as he wanted, but he got a good job and got a place with his girlfriend at the time. Sorry that I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but it does help to explain why I spend Christmas the way that I do. None of us kids really spend time with our parents. My older brother talks to his dad, of course, but we have no contact with our mom or our dad. Sometimes we'll text each other happy birthday, but that's about it. And when my paternal grandparents passed, we stopped even getting together for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Us kids will get together and have dinner, but that's about it. So instead of sitting home alone, I like to make use of my time and put some good out into the world. I like to volunteer at a local homeless shelter. I help out year-round there, but I also like to go and decorate for Christmas. I make a lot of baked goods and put together little shelf-stable baskets for them, and I pass them out. And I also help make a nice holiday dinner for all of them. I like to go the whole 9 yards because, well, they deserve it. Everyone deserves to have a happy holiday. On this year, we actually had one hell of a snow and ice storm, so the shelter was even more packed than normal. We would have people just stay on those nights that had bad weather and then leave the next day. And it was looking like that was going to happen that night, too. Real quick, to explain the shelter layout just a bit, it has the main area, which has a few TVs, some old couches, and tables. Towards the back is the kitchen with the buffet bar in front of it, where we pass out the trays of food. To the left of the kitchen, we had a few rows of rooms, and basically that just had beds and a small shelf for drawers. All donated, thankfully. So, the night was going along smoothly with very minimal hiccups. People would line up, get their plate, then grab a gift bag at the end. We had some people that preferred to be left alone while others were very social and did their best to be in the Christmas spirit. One of those people was a man named Rabbit. And no, I'm not sure if that was his legal name or anything. That's just what he told everyone to call him. Rabbit had been at the shelter for a few months already. He seemed to really be trying to make the most of the situation, as he was always so cheerful and outgoing, and he was always singing. It was actually quite a breath of fresh air to be around. He helped keep the shelter clean and even helped others that were staying there. So when his demeanor completely changed, it definitely stood out to everyone. We had all been sitting around the lobby area, some people reading, drawing, a few were playing a card game, and others were just sitting by watching. Rabbit was one of those people playing the card game, and when the game ended, they were starting a new round. But Rabbit stood up and waved to them like he was done. His smile quickly dropped, and I noticed this as he sat back in the chair. I watched him at first, thinking maybe he wasn't feeling well, but there was something about the empty stare that had me concerned. I've experienced people that were under the influence, and even those with disorders like schizophrenia. This didn't seem like any of those, but at the same time, I didn't know what it was. I asked him if he was okay, and he slowly turned his head towards me, his expression remaining the same, and just said, "I'm waiting." Then turned his head slowly back facing forward, but looking at nothing. Curious, I tried to push it further and asked, "Waiting for what, Rabbit?" Without saying anything or looking at me, he stood up slowly and walked to the corner of the room. The literal corner, and just stared at it, his hands to his side and slightly hunched over. I decided to cautiously follow him. I know people can be unpredictable, so I didn't want to put myself in a dangerous situation, but something told me that I needed to check on him. I told Peter, one of the other workers that was still in the kitchen, since he was male, in case I might need help, and he watched as I approached. Once at Rabbit's side, I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't respond. I asked him again what or who he was waiting for. He would not take his eyes off of the corner of the room, but all he said was, "You don't get it." His normally bright green eyes filled with happiness now looked glazed over and hollow. It honestly worried me, so I had Peter help me escort him to the room that he'd been staying in. I was thinking maybe we could get him to lay down, and then we wouldn't have to worry about him hurting himself, or someone else. Or so I thought. We continued with our night after that. Everyone enjoying their meal, the little gift bags I made in each other's company, but I kept getting this nagging feeling at the back of my head that I could not shake. I asked one of the other volunteers if they had seen Rabbit at all, and they shook their head. No one had seen him since he went to his room, and with this odd change in demeanor, I was actually worried about him. So, once again, I told them I was going to check on him, and Peter agreed to go with me. As I approached his room, I could see the door was slightly ajar, but the light was off. So, maybe he was able to fall asleep. I slowly opened the door, but I could hear him softly talking and giggling, almost. When I didn't see him on the bed, I called out his name and reached for the light switch. And I still cannot get that sight out of my head. Once the light was on, I peeked my head to the other side of the room and spotted Rabbit. He was sitting in the chair, facing the wall, and pretty much drawing on it, with what looked like blood. It was everywhere. I soon realized that he was covered in blood from the torso down and on his hands. There was blood on the floor by him, and the wall was covered with little pictures and phrases, all done in blood. This may sound weird, but if you've been around a lot of blood, I guess, or have ever had a serious injury, you know that coppery smell that it has. And that was all the room smelled like. I immediately told Peter to call an ambulance, and I tried calmly asking if Rabbit was okay, but I didn't want to cause him panic. He looked at me smiling and said, "I'm better than ever." I couldn't help but be taken aback. This man was obviously injured. He had to be, with this much blood around and him being the only one in the room. I was surprised he was still conscious. Since he was still acting normal, I suppose, I tried asking him if he was hurt, and not seeing any immediate source of the blood, I asked him where it came from. "Sometimes, you have to let the color out. They were trapped inside me, you see?" he said, smiling at me with his arms outstretched. I did my best to remain calm and unbothered, but also tried to move fast to find out where he was bleeding from and stop it. We grabbed a few towels and asked him to clean up, but he just started undressing and wrapping the towels around him, all while singing Christmas songs. When the medics arrived, we explained what happened and they started checking him out, but couldn't immediately find a wound. They told us to check on everyone else while they got him loaded up into the ambulance. After doing a check on the other guests and comparing it to the check-in book, no one was missing, and no one was injured. So they packed up and they took him in. We were then left to clean up all the blood in the room. It seriously looked like a murder scene. It was eerie and almost hard to look at. We managed to get it cleaned up and blocked off the room due to the bleach smell, and just hoped that Rabbit would be okay. The rest of the night went on without any other incident, thankfully. We have an emergency contact list at the shelter in case anything happens to the guests. They'll leave us names of people, if they have anyone, and sometimes we were even their emergency contact. In Rabbit's case, he had a brother listed, but we never heard from him, so we didn't know if it was really his brother, if they were estranged, etc. But he did show up at the shelter a few days after to collect all of Rabbit's things. He told us that he was okay, but the bizarre part was that they couldn't find a wound that would have caused that much blood loss. They said it was definitely his blood, because he started to become faint and pale at the hospital. But he kept up his cheery demeanor while he was there. He claimed that he didn't do anything to himself, or didn't remember either. His brother was grabbing his things as he was going to stay with him for a little while, and he thanked us for looking after him. He said that he knew Rabbit wasn't in a good place, but he didn't realize that he was homeless, and he confided in us that he hated himself for not knowing sooner. We did our best to comfort him, because a lot of people that we see do the same. Some won't tell their family and friends how they're living out of shame or not wanting to burden them. I was just happy to see that he did have family that cared about him, and he was able to step in and help him. I just wish that I didn't have to witness what I did to learn that. So, there's my Christmas story. Thankfully, nothing that crazy has happened since then, but I do still volunteer there, so who knows what the next one will be like. So that, my friends, was a collection of some scary Christmas stories. Scary and Christmas are two words that typically don't go together. Two words that kind of mean the opposite, right? Scary meaning, well, scary. And Christmas being a jolly, jovial time of the year. But, alas, we do have some scary stories that happen on Christmas. Had a few of them, have a few more, as you just heard. Yeah, good stuff. Good scary stories. I don't have anything to really tell about Christmas. Christmas has always been fairly mundane. Though who knows, maybe this year will change that. We'll see, right? We'll see. Hopefully not, but there's always the possibility. Patience gave me a very shifty look whenever I said that. Anyways, good stuff, good stories. Yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed them. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, as it does help tremendously. If you are new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as that helps significantly. That helps the channel grow. We're almost at 26,000. I think we're going to hit it by the end of the year. Pretty good stuff. Good year for growth. Not quite the number I had hoped for or marked on my goal sheet, but we did pretty damn good. Got pretty close. Very close. So, I am not one to shy away from celebrating success, even if that success is just under the goal line. Because you know what? Stretch goals exist for a reason. If I gained 1 sub in 2023, I succeeded. If I gained... I was going to look to see how many I have gained, but I don't know. Let's say it was over 10,000, I think. I don't know. All of it is success. It's growth, it's success, it's continuation, it is resilience. And that, my friends, means it's been a damn good year. The other thing you could do is leave me a comment down below the video of your thoughts, how you're feeling, how you're doing, how's it going. I and Patience were doing some needle felting today. I bought some kits from Amazon, and they're fun. Little reindeers are not quite coming out looking like they're supposed to, but I now have this really fancy 1/4 inch stab wound in my index finger on my left hand. It's visible. It's not bleeding or anything. It's just very visible, and it's under the skin, and it's just a line, because I stabbed myself with a felting needle. Because that's how I do things. I 110% it. Felt the wool? Hell no. Felt needle. Needle the wool? Hell no. Needle my skin. It hurts, kind of, to be honest with you. And this, of course, comes not long after me cutting my thumb on a potato slicing thingy. The one where you push the potato down and slide it back and forth, not like a slicer. It's mostly healed, but I now have fun injuries on both my hands, so there's that. Good old scars. They're memories, I suppose. I don't know. Anyways, it is what it is. Look, I'm a mess. That's just me. I always will be. Yeah. The other thing you could do is join memberships or Patreon if you want early access content like this. Blah, blah, blah. You get the point. You get the picture. Let's wrap this up. My friends, first off, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. You will not see me again until Tuesday, the 26th. That's going to be the glitch video. I'm not going to put it on Christmas because I feel like it would just flop. So, Tuesday the 26th will be this week's glitch video. And yeah. So I'll see you then. Until then, remember you are loved. You are valid. You're the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you're in a place that has snow, make a snow angel or a snowman for me because we don't have any here. Yeah. Anyways, until next time, friends. Much love, happy holidays, and sleep well.